The champagne glass was still in my hand when his palm connected with my cheek. 550 people went silent at once. That kind of silence has a sound, a held breath multiplied 500 times. My ears rang. The glass didn't even break. It just tipped, slow motion, and spilled down the front of my ivory dress like something bleeding out. I didn't touch my face. I didn't cry. I reached into my clutch, found my phone, and dialed one contact. He picked up on the first ring like he'd been waiting. "Daddy," I said, my voice flat and even. "It's time." Somewhere behind me, my husband laughed and told the room I was being dramatic as usual. He had no idea what he'd just started. My name is Elena Marsh. I was 38 years old, and up until that night, I was the woman everyone described as so composed, so put together. The compliment people give you right before they underestimate you. I built Marsh & Company. Interiors from a card table in a studio apartment into a design firm that grossed $6.2 million a year, with contracts stretching from Nashville to Miami. 14 years of 80-hour weeks. 14 years of turning down vacations because a client needed a walkthrough on a Saturday. I was also, for 11 of those years, married to Richard Voss, a man I met when he was a mid-level real estate broker with a nice suit and better charm, and who was, by the night of the gala, the self-proclaimed visionary behind Voss Properties Group, a company that existed in large part because I had personally invested $1.4 million of my own earnings into it over the years. Not loans. Investments. Equity I never bothered to formalize on paper because I trusted him. Because he was my husband, and you don't ask your husband to sign a contract. That night was the 10th anniversary gala for Voss Properties. 550 guests. Investors, city council members, 3 local news cameras. I had planned the entire event, the venue, the caterer, the seating chart, the string quartet, because Richard didn't have the bandwidth, his words, and because some small, stupid, hopeful part of me still liked being the woman behind the man. I found out at 8:47 p.m. exactly how much that hope was worth. I'd gone looking for him to synchronize the toast timing with the MC. I found him instead in the alcove behind the champagne fountain, one hand resting low on the back of a woman in a red dress I did not recognize, his head bent close to her ear the way it used to bend close to mine. "She'll never know," he was saying, low and amused. "She's too busy playing hostess to notice anything that isn't seating charts." The woman laughed. A bright, easy laugh. The laugh of someone who has done this before and isn't worried. "And the escrow account?" she asked. "Still moving?" "Slow and steady," Richard said. "Nobody audits their own wife." I stood there in my $3,000 dress holding 2 flutes of champagne, and I understood in the space of about 4 seconds 3 separate things: that my husband was unfaithful, that escrow account was not pillow talk, and that he had just said out loud that he was stealing from me and counting on my trust to cover his tracks. I did not confront him. I smiled, walked back into the ballroom, and handed the extra champagne flute to a waiter. 20 minutes later, when he accidentally spilled a drink joke about my hovering during his toast, a joke that got a big laugh from the room, and I quietly corrected a fact he'd gotten wrong about our own company's founding date, he crossed the stage, took my chin in his hand like I was a child, and said, low enough for only the front tables to hear, "Don't correct me in public again." I told him evenly, quietly, that I hadn't meant to embarrass him. He slapped me anyway, in front of 550 guests. Because by then, he'd already decided what kind of wife I was going to be for the rest of that night. Quiet. He miscalculated. Beat 1, the escrow account. The morning after the gala, I didn't confront Richard. I told him I needed a few days to think, packed a bag, and drove to my father's lake house. Richard didn't argue. He looked almost relieved. My father, Walter Marsh, was 71 years old, a retired forensic accountant who'd spent 30 years testifying in white-collar fraud cases before juries who'd never heard the word amortization in their lives. When I told him what I'd overheard, escrow account, slow and steady, nobody audits their own wife, he didn't say a word. He just opened his old laptop and asked me for our joint account logins. 3 days later he found it. A shell entity called Voss Bridge Holdings LLC, registered 18 months earlier, funded by $340,000 in transfers out of our joint investment account. Money I had put there from the sale of my firm's downtown property. The transfers were labeled, in the account notes, Furniture Inventory. Voss Properties did not sell furniture. Beat 2 the confrontation. I called Richard and asked him casually what Voss Bridge Holdings was. He didn't miss a beat. "Oh, that's just a subsidiary structure my attorney set up for liability shielding," he said, smooth as poured concrete. "It's standard in commercial real estate. You separate the acquisition entity from the operating entity, so if a deal goes sideways, the parent company's assets are protected. It's boring accounting stuff, babe. You wouldn't want to sit through the explanation." I told him that made sense. I told him I was glad he was being so careful with our money. I hung up and looked at my father. "He thinks I believed him," I said. "Good," my father said. "Let him." Beat 3 the deeper rot. What my father found next took him 11 days, for subpoenaed bank records, obtained legally through a lawyer, because he insisted we do this by the book, and one very useful cousin who worked in county records. Voss Bridge Holdings wasn't a liability shield. It was a second company, quietly owned 60% by Richard and 40% by a woman named Carla Denning, the woman in the red dress. Together they had used it to purchase 3 distressed properties, using my $340,000 as the down payment, then flipped all 3 at a combined profit of $890,000, profit that never touched our joint accounts, never touched Voss Properties books, and never touched me. Carla Denning was not, as it turned out, a random gala guest. She was Voss Properties' Director of Acquisitions. She had been on the payroll, my payroll functionally, since I'd personally funded 2 of Richard's early hires for 4 years. Beat 4. Overheard. The following week I drove back into the city under the excuse of getting my head straight, in our own house while Richard was traveling. I wasn't there for closure. I was there because my father had asked me to plant something small, more on that later, and while I was in the guest bathroom off the kitchen, I heard Richard come home early with Carla. "She actually bought the liability shield story," Richard said, laughing, the ice in his glass clinking. "God, I love how much she trusts me. It's almost sad." "Almost," Carla said. "What happens when the Bridge Holdings paperwork comes up in a divorce filing? Prenups don't cover embezzlement, Richard." "There's no prenup," Richard said. "She never asked for one. She thought asking for one would insult the marriage." He laughed again, that easy, satisfied laugh I used to think was charming. "By the time she figures any of this out, if she ever does, the money's clean, the properties are sold, and I own 51% of Voss on paper. She's not an owner. She's an investor who never got a stock certificate. That was the whole point." I stood in that bathroom with my hand over my mouth and I did not make a sound. Beat 5 the worst thing. The last discovery came from my father, and it was the one that stopped being about money. Buried in the county filings was a name I didn't expect. My own name forged on a 2019 document authorizing the transfer of my firm's downtown property equity into what would become the seed capital for Voss Bridge Holdings. My signature. Notarized. I had never signed it. I had never even seen that notary's name before in my life. My father set the printout down on the kitchen table very gently, the way you set down something that might go off. "Elena," he said, "he didn't just cheat and hide profit. He committed forgery and fraud using your identity. This isn't a bad marriage anymore. This is a felony." I made a decision at that kitchen table, and it was the most deliberate decision of my adult life. I was going to become to Richard and Carla exactly the woman they already believed I was. Soft, distracted, a little lost, easy to manage. I went back to the house 4 days later with my shoulders rounded and my voice pitched half a note higher than usual. Smaller, more apologetic, the voice of a woman auditioning for forgiveness. I let my hands shake just slightly when I picked up my coffee cup. I stopped wearing my sharp blazers and wore soft cardigans instead. The kind that make you look like you're cold all the time. Like you need someone to take care of you. "I don't even understand half of what you do at work," I told Richard over dinner, twirling pasta I had no intention of finishing. I think I just want to focus on the house for a while. Maybe step back from the firm's finances. It's also numbers, you know? I trust you with the numbers. I watched his shoulders drop half an inch with relief. I watched Carla at a follow-up business dinner I was invited to as an afterthought, exchange a look with him across the table. The look of two people who believe they've won. Inside, I was doing the opposite of everything my face and voice were performing. I was cataloging every date, every dollar figure, every name Carla mentioned. Every time Richard used the phrase liability shielding, I filed it away because my father had taught me something in his 30 years of testimony. People who are lying rarely change their script. They repeat the same false explanation word for word, because they rehearsed it once and never had to rehearse it again. Nobody ever pushed back hard enough to make them. Nobody had pushed back on me. Yet. She's finally staying in her lane, I heard Richard tell Carla one evening. Not knowing I was in the hallway with the laundry basket balanced on my hip like a prop, playing the role of a wife doing chores invisible. It only took a wedding day slap to remind her where that lane is. I carried the laundry basket up the stairs. I did not drop a single sock. My father and I built the trap over 6 weeks, and we built it in layers because a man like Richard needed more than one door to walk through before he understood he was already caught. Layer 1, the bait document. I told Richard in my new soft voice that I wanted to finally do the responsible thing and set up a living trust. So the house and my part of the firm are protected, for both of us no matter what. I asked gently if he could have his attorney review a draft I'd write up myself, since I don't really understand this stuff. The draft I gave him listed a fabricated $2.1 million life insurance policy naming him primary beneficiary, with a clause requiring full financial disclosure of all entities either of us held interest in, including, buried in paragraph 14, a specific line item asking him to list Voss Bridge Holdings LLC and any affiliated acquisition entities. If he was clean, he'd have flagged it, confused, and asked what I meant. If he was dirty, he'd either quietly refuse to sign or, and this is what my father predicted, he'd try to get Carla to help him restructure Bridge Holdings quickly, panicked, before the trust could be finalized, leaving a fresh paper trail of exactly the kind investigators love. A sudden flurry of transfers timed suspiciously close to a legal disclosure request. He panicked. Beautifully. 3 new wire transfers moved out of Bridge Holdings within 9 days. Into an account under Carla's maiden name. My father, and the forensic accountant he'd brought on formally as a consultant, tracked every one. Layer 2, the recording. I bought a small recorder, the kind that clips to the inside of a jacket lapel, and I wore it to every business dinner for 6 weeks. Most nights it caught nothing but small talk. On the 11th night, it caught this from Carla 3 drinks in. You know the notary who signed off on the 2019 transfer? He's my second cousin. He owed me a favor. Nobody's going to check a rubber stamp from a licensed notary. And this from Richard laughing. God, I love that you think of everything. I sat across from them that night with my hands folded softly in my lap, nodding along to a conversation about school district rezoning, while a recorder against my ribs captured a felony confession. Layer 3, the real-time watch. My father set up a discreet monitoring arrangement with our attorney, legal disclosed above board, so that any attempt to further move funds out of the accounts under investigation would trigger an alert to both of them and, per a judge's pre-authorized order, freeze the relevant accounts within the hour. I didn't fully understand the mechanics. I understood the result. Richard could not run. I picked the date for the confrontation myself. Voss Properties annual investor appreciation dinner, 300 guests this time, smaller than the gala, but with something the gala didn't have. Half the room were people whose money Richard was actively courting for a new development fund. People who would care very much about fraud. The night before, sitting across from my father at his kitchen table, I asked him if I was doing the right thing. You're doing the thorough thing, he said. Right takes care of itself when you're thorough. The dinner was held in the same hotel ballroom as the gala 8 months earlier. Richard's choice, not mine, though I let him believe it was a sentimental coincidence he'd landed on himself. He liked symmetry. He liked feeling like the architect of every room he stood in. He was mid-speech, 300 guests fed and wined, gesturing at a slide behind him that read Voss Properties. A decade of vision when Carla, seated at the head table beside him in a green dress this time, close enough that no one at that point pretended otherwise, leaned toward the microphone stand near her seat and said, loud enough for the front tables to laugh along, and a decade of putting up with the help who thought she was a partner. The room laughed. A small, ugly, easy laugh, the kind that happens when a room has already decided who's allowed to be laughed at. Richard grinned and raised his glass toward me, 3 tables back, where I sat with my father beside me for the first time all evening. To the wife who finally learned her role, he said. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I never once raised my voice. Richard, I said, my heels clicking once, twice, 3 times against the marble as I walked toward the head table. I'd like to correct a fact, since you enjoyed correcting me so much at our last event here. The room went quiet the way rooms do when they smell blood. Voss Bridge Holdings LLC, I said, was funded with $340,000 of my money, transferred using a signature on this document. I set a printed copy on the table in front of him, calm, unhurried, that I never signed, notarized by a man who happens to be Carla's second cousin. Carla's smile did not move, but her hand did, a small involuntary jerk toward her own glass. That entity generated $890,000 in profit, I continued, none of which touched Voss Properties books and none of which touched me. 60% to you, Richard. 40% to Carla, who has been your director of acquisitions, and, as I understand it, considerably more than that for the better part of 4 years. Elena, Richard started, and I watched him reach automatically for the same smooth explanatory tone he'd used on the phone 8 weeks earlier. This is a liability structure, my attorney. Nobody audits their own wife, I said quietly, cutting him off with his own sentence. That's what you told Carla at our first gala in this room, while your hand was on the small of her back. I heard you say it. I have it recorded, that, and the notary favor, and 11 other conversations from the last 6 weeks. I set my phone on the table, face up, a waveform frozen mid-playback. I also want to thank you both, I said, and for the first time all night my voice dropped, not louder but slower, each word landing like a stone set down deliberately, for teaching me something. You said I was too busy playing hostess to notice anything that wasn't a seating chart. So I want you to know I noticed. I noticed everything. For 6 weeks. 2 men in plain suits who had been standing near the ballroom's side entrance for the last 20 minutes. Investigators my father's attorney had coordinated with, present because a judge had, that afternoon, signed off on a forgery and fraud investigation triggered by the very account movements Richard's own panic had produced, stepped forward. Mr. Voss, one of them said, we need you to come with us to answer some questions regarding a forged notarized document and irregular fund transfers totaling approximately $340,000. The room did not laugh this time. I picked up the printed document, the fake trust draft I'd handed him 6 weeks earlier, the one whose paragraph 14 had started this whole unraveling, and I tore it once cleanly down the middle and set the 2 halves on the white tablecloth in front of his empty chair. I don't need it anymore, I said. You already told me everything I needed to know. Then I turned, took my father's arm, and walked out of the ballroom at exactly the pace I'd walked in with, unhurried, composed, the woman everyone always described as so put together. Within 72 hours, Richard Voss was formally charged with forgery in the 2nd degree and wire fraud, the forensic paper trail my father built cited by name in the county prosecutor's initial filing. Within 2 weeks, Voss Properties' primary lender called in a review of all outstanding credit lines after the fraud allegations became public. 3 major investors publicly withdrew their commitments to the new development fund, citing irregularities in company leadership. Carla Denning was named as a co-defendant in the fraud case 11 days later, after the recorded admission about the notary was authenticated and entered as evidence. Her real estate license was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. Richard's attorney attempted, in a statement to the local news outlet that had covered both galas, to characterize the situation as a private marital dispute that has been sensationalized. The prosecutor's office declined to comment beyond confirming the charges. The forged 2019 transfer document, notarized by Carla's cousin, whose notary license was independently revoked by the state within the month, spoke for itself. Divorce proceedings moved quickly once the criminal filing was public. Without a prenup to complicate things, and with clear documentation of the fraudulent transfer of my own funds, my attorney secured not only the dissolution of the marriage but a judgment requiring restitution of the misappropriated $340,000 plus a portion of the $890,000 in flip profits, pending the outcome of the criminal case. I did one more thing before I let the story close, and it mattered to me more than any of the legal outcomes. Voss Properties employed 31 people who had nothing to do with any of this: an office manager who'd worked there 9 years, a junior architect paying off student loans, 2 contractors with families. I used part of the settlement and a conversation with the court-appointed receiver overseeing the company's assets to help structure a transition that kept the firm's legitimate contracts running under new, clean leadership. So those 31 paychecks didn't disappear because of what Richard and Carla had done. I didn't do it for credit. I did it because 31 people shouldn't lose their jobs over another man's ego. It was raining hard, the kind of cold October rain that gets into your collar, when Richard showed up at my father's lake house 11 weeks later. I hadn't lived there permanently. I'd moved into a small place of my own in the city, closer to the firm I still ran, still growing, now without $340,000 quietly bleeding out of it every year. But I was there that weekend and I heard the knock through the storm door before I saw him. He looked smaller than I remembered. His coat was wet through. He didn't have a car in the driveway. Someone must have dropped him at the end of the road. The restitution judgment had taken the house. The criminal case had taken the company, effectively, once the receiver finished the transition. Carla, I'd heard, had taken a plea deal and testified against him rather than go down for the same amount of time. "Elena," he said, and his voice had none of the smoothness left in it. "I don't have anywhere else to go. I know I don't deserve. I just need somewhere to stay. Few nights. Please." I stood in the doorway with the porch light behind me and the rain coming down between us, and I felt, for one honest second, the ghost of the woman who used to twirl pasta she had no intention of eating just to make him feel comfortable at his own dinner table. Then I felt nothing at all, which was its own kind of peace. "You told a room full of people I only noticed seating charts," I said. "I noticed everything, Richard. I still do." I closed the door. Gently. No slam, no show, just a door closing the way doors are supposed to. My father was in the kitchen when I came back in, making tea he didn't really want, the way he always found a reason to be nearby without hovering. He didn't ask who it was. He already knew. "You did the thorough thing," I told him, echoing his own words back to him, and for the first time in a long time I laughed, a real one, not a performance. "That's all it ever takes," he said and poured me a cup. "Here's what I learned, and I'll say it plainly. The people who count on you staying soft are the same people who've never once considered what happens if you decide, quietly and on your own timeline, to stop. Being underestimated isn't a weakness. It's information about exactly how much rope someone will hand you before they realize you were never planning to hang yourself with it. And the loudest, cruelest moment someone chooses to humiliate you in public is very often the beginning of the end for them. Not for you. If you were rooting for Elena the moment that glass tipped over, let me know in the comments and tell me, would you have played weak for 6 weeks? Or would you have confronted them the same night? If this story hit you, hit that like button, subscribe for more real justice stories every week, and drop a comment below. I read every single one.